Welcome to the Female Disruptors Virtual Summit, and I'm happy to have you here today. I'm introducing Krista Neher. She is the CEO and founder of Bootcamp Digital, and we've known each other for maybe more than 10 years. Done lots of workshops together on digital marketing and public relations and social media, and she is here to share with you, whether you're a personal brand or a business brand, basically how to launch your personal brand. It doesn't matter. Like, you need to have your own personal brand. So I'm going to turn it over to Krista, and she's going to take it from here. And you're on mute.
Excellent. Hello, everyone. And Lisa, thank you so much for having me today. I'm really excited to be with you. And Lisa, thank you for putting together such an empowering and meaningful day for women to really reconnect and refocus ourselves and stay innovative and ahead of the curve. So thank you for this amazing opportunity you've created for so many of us today. So as mentioned, and the basis of personal branding really comes from my experience building brands in general. I started off working at Procter & Gamble, where I worked on some of the biggest brands. And what I realized as I was building my own brand is that the same principles that apply to the biggest brands in the world also to human beings, as we tricks and secrets behind how you can build a powerful and meaningful personal brand. So a little bit about me. I started my marketing career, now we're gearing up towards 20 years ago, 15, 20 years. And since then, I've written 6 books on digital marketing, including a textbook, a dummies, personal branding. I have the pleasure world, and training is essentially what my business. But I wanted to open by sharing a little bit about my personal brand journey with you, because depending on where you're at in your own, you may be at the early stages, or maybe you already have a lot of the foundations in place and you're just looking to accelerate. But regardless of where you are in your personal brand journey, my hope is to give you actionable tips that will take you to that next level. So my personal brand journey started on this site. Does anyone know what this site is? You can drop it in the chat if you know. But those of us who are old school remember personal brand journey started. Pro tip: if you ever created a MySpace profile, you should Google it, because it's probably still there. So I found this like a couple years ago, still like hanging out on the internet. But yeah, so mine started on MySpace. And at the time, I was really using it as a personal social network. But then what I saw was people who I met in a business context started connecting with me. And I was working for Procter & Gamble in corporate America so much. Then I started working with a startup. I was getting more visibility, and I thought, this isn't really how I want people to perceive me. Sure, the fun things I like to do is a part of me, but that's not really the impression that I want to create with people. So I started a blog. And this should give you hope, because whatever you do with your personal brand, it will be better than where I started. And look at me now, right? But I don't know if you can see this. The URL of my first professional blog was thisiswhyimhot.wordpress.com. So I created this blog to build a more professional presence, and that was the URL, right? Killing it. But what I started doing was, even on this horrible URL, I started and how to just the things that I was doing in the startup and how other people could see similar success by doing similar things. And then over time, it evolved. And now I have a really powerful personal presence online that brings me all sorts of opportunities. So here's the thing. When I introduced myself, I showed you the books I've written, the media appearances I've had. I didn't mention my global clients, but I work with businesses all over the world. And almost all of these big opportunities, you know, those big opportunities you sometimes get where you're like, oh my God, I can't believe I'm going to do this. Almost every single one of those came from my personal brand, where somebody found me and said, you're what we need. And that is the power of a strong personal brand. Instead of me going out there and begging for opportunities that are really hard to get, the opportunities are key. And if I think about it, one of my first, what I would say one of my first breaks was I wrote the first textbook on social media. I had never thought about writing a textbook. Somebody read my blog posts about how to build a social media strategy. He was a textbook writer with a contract for a social media book. He didn't know anything about social media. So he asked me to co-author that book. The same thing happened with the Dummies book. If I had wanted to write a Dummies book, I could have sent in 20 proposals and never got a response. But they had an idea to write about visual social marketing. They found me talking about it, and then they came and asked me to write the book. So the real power of creating a good brand is, regardless of your aspirations, I'm talking about writing books, getting speaking gigs, landing clients. Even if it's within your own workplace and you just want to have more opportunities to grow, having a strong personal brand will absolutely help to get you there, because it will attract the opportunities that you want to you. I did a presentation for a corporate group of young professionals a while ago, and I talked to the guy who booked me afterwards. We were debriefing, and I got to tell you, what this guy said blew my mind. Mind blown. I was like, you should be teaching this, not me. But here's what he said. He said, I believe so strongly. So this is someone, he is in his 20s working at a big corporation. And he was like, I actually think that a lot of burnout and stress in the workplace is because people don't think about their personal brands. I was like, what do you mean by that? It's a big thing. And he said, well, people end up somewhere where they didn't intend to be. They didn't get the opportunities they wanted, but it's because they didn't sit down and say, here's what I want, and then build a plan that helps to get them there. And their personal brand wasn't established to be bringing in those opportunities. So I thought that was really interesting food for thought. And yeah, Lisa mentions as well, getting media coverage is absolutely a part of your personal brand. And what's funny is, when I set out to start building my personal brand, I said, what are some of the things that I want to get for myself? And one of the things that I said was I wanted more media coverage, because I saw other people who were speakers, when they were introduced, people were like seen on CBS, NBC, I was like, ooh, that sounds fancy. Then you realize it's local affiliates that are not actually very hard to get onto, but it brings those opportunities. I was on CNN and the Wall Street Journal because people found me who needed an expert. So yeah, all of these things are kind of interrelated. So what I want to tell you about, we already talked a little bit about why your brand matters, but I'm going to give you the secret sauce to define, design, and deliver a personal brand that gets results and attracts the opportunities that you want. So when we think about personal branding, the first thing is, well, what is a brand, right? And really what a brand is, as Jeff Bezos said, it's what people say about you when you leave the room. And that's what you want to be thinking about, right? How did you make people feel? What perception did you create? And the idea here is to be deliberate about it. Now, sometimes we feel like, well, I need to show up this way, or I need to look like that. But I like to use the example of Steve Jobs and Bill Gates, because if you look at them, they're both doing kind of the same thing, right? They're both running these big tech companies, or were, but they have very different ways in which they go about it, very different personal brands that they bring to life to achieve it. And what you want to think about is, what type of brand feels authentic to you? I also always like to use the example of Rachel Ray and Martha Stewart, right? Rachel Ray is very relatable, right? We got Rachel Hubby's John fave dish. Extra shrimp make it super delish, right? Very cool and approachable. Martha Stewart, this classic chicken, I don't even know this word, turns humble ingredients into a heartiest dinner, right? Now, what you can see by this is they both have different styles, different approaches, but they're both very successful in achieving the same thing. And so what you want to think about for your personal brand, and what I'm going to walk you through, is you want to think about, where do I want to be? But then what does my roadmap look like to get there? How do I want to be perceived? And what is the brands that I want to create for myself? So our goal here isn't just to not suck. A lot of people will say, well, there's something horrible about me online. What we want to do is make a brand that attracts opportunities and makes people follow with you. And I mentioned this earlier, but my background is actually in marketing and brand building. I've worked with some of the biggest brands in the world. And really what I'm going to show you is the methods and strategies that they use that you can apply for yourself. So what you need to know before you start is these are big questions. This is going to be iterative. I showed you my first "This is why I'm hot" website. So I've gotten better and better every year. So you're going to get better and better every year. And what you want to think about is continuing and growing over time. And when I think of a lot of the speakers at this event, who I know Lisa comes to, also some of the other speakers, what I've seen is their brands evolving over time and them elevating their game every single year. So something to think about, and you can look for other people that can inspire you and use them as a way to get more insights and inspiration. And I know a lot of the speakers are great for you to maybe connect with to see what are they doing right and how can you learn from it. But what you don't want to do is wait until you're perfect. I did a personal branding workshop a couple years back, and this one lady, we were talking about LinkedIn, and she was saying, I never do more on LinkedIn because I hate my profile picture. I'm like, you can literally fix that in one afternoon. She's like, yeah, but my makeup never looks right. And it's just excuses. So don't make excuses. Don't wait to be perfect. Just get started. So here are the 3 steps to building a strong personal brand that I mentioned earlier. Define, design, deliver. Define is what are you about and what do you want? Design is how do you make this compelling and desirable? And then deliver is how do we and grow your visibility? So let's start with defining. Here you want to say, what is your brand all about? And I'm going to give you a bold challenge here. Oftentimes we get in our own heads and we have this idea of who we are and how we're perceived. But if you ask people what they think about you, you might actually be surprised at what comes back. And so what I would encourage you to do, if you're bold enough, and you must be bold because you're in this conference, is go on Facebook, LinkedIn, or email some colleagues and ask them, what are 3 words that you would use to describe me? And what you're going to see is how people think about you right now. And then what you can do is compare that to how you want to be perceived. I have this picture of these weird dudes up here because I worked with a friend who retired from finance at Procter & Gamble. And he was working with all these startups. And what he thought he brought to the table was this corporate, et cetera, et cetera. When he asked the people he works with, how would you describe me? People said friendly and approachable, knowledgeable, et cetera. And it changed the way he was thinking about himself because he thought of himself as this kind of like outsider. And the way people felt about him was really different. So if you have a few minutes, seriously do this. You could be like, I was told I have to do this in a training if you want to, soften the blow, but it'll either confirm what you already know or give you some new ideas. And unless your friends are total jerks, no one's going to put anything horrible there, right? Maybe, but hopefully not horrible. So once you've got an idea of how you're perceived, you want to attract yourself in the next year, 5 years, 10 years. And you may not have the exact answers, but as close as you can get, the better. Because what this is going to help you think about is, what is it that I want to attract to myself? And if you put out there things related to this, that's how you start to get traction, right? So start thinking about, what are some of your goals? What are the opportunities that you want? I mentioned when I started working on my personal brand, I was speaking, right? And everyone uses their brand differently. But I was speaking. And so some of the things that I wanted was, I wanted more media appearances because I thought that would make people think I was fancy. I wanted certain clients, right? I had never set out to get a book deal, but man, that was pretty cool. So by identifying my goals, I'm able to then craft a brand that's going to attract those things to me. The next step is designing your brand. So how do you make your brand compelling and powerful and standing out? And so here we use the principles that make the world's biggest brand strong, but we apply them to ourselves. And I have these as a super sweet acronym: MADE, memorable, authentic, different, and educated. So when it comes to memorability, something that always cracks me up is a lot of people will be like, well, no one remembers me, although it's like something inherent in their DNA that makes them not memorable. Memorability is not like a magical feature that some of us have and others don't. Memorability is about crafting a message and presenting yourself in a way that makes it easy for people to remember you. And the three elements that grow memorability are specificity, simplicity, and consistency. So when I started meeting people and I was doing social media, this was back in 2007, people would be like, oh, what do you do? And I'm like, well, I've done large branding and also, I do social media, but, I didn't want to pigeonhole myself. So instead, I would ramble on about many different things I did. But if somebody said, hey, what does Krista do? Someone would be like, I don't know, something about marketing. That was how I presented myself. The more specific you are, the more opportunities you get, because people recommend you and how to refer you. The queen of the metaverse is speaking at this conference, right? That's pretty darn specific, simple, and memorable. So specificity wins. You can always branch out into more. The other thing is to be consistent. I try and look as visually consistent as possible when I work professionally, so that I'm continuing to craft a really strong visual image in people's mind as well. So the next thing is authenticity. It always works better when people can see who you really are. Plus, it'll feel more comfortable for you. So think about how you can build on your strengths. I sometimes hear people talk about their weaknesses, and I'm like, for the purpose of your personal brand, no one cares. Supercharge your strengths. Think about what are you best at and how do you make that bigger and bigger and really blow that out of the water? How do you connect with people in a meaningful way? If you think of how I present to you today, even, why do I show you my horrid MySpace profile and my sweet, this is why I'm hot WordPress site? Partly to show my journey, but also this allows you to connect with me in a more meaningful way because you're getting to know me with a little bit of authenticity. The next one is differentiated. So try to think about, what is it that makes you different? Can you specialize in something? Can you be unique? Lisa does an amazing job at this as well. There's a gazillion PR people all over the place. Lisa specializes social PR, right? And by getting that specialization, you're more likely to succeed. And this is something you'll hear a lot about from marketing experts, is niching, 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 which basically means get more and more specific about what you do. And the last one is educated. And here we think about really its credibility. I called it educated because I wanted a sweet acronym, to be honest. But with educated, we think about what is your credibility or accomplishments that supports what you do. So I still remember when I started out, when I had left corporate America and I was at my first conference, probably this is one where I had first come across Lisa. And we're at PubCon actually. And, people would be like, hey, what do you do? And I'm like, oh, I do social media. And no one was interested in me, right? And I could walk away and be like, oh, I'm just not memorable. No one cares. But like I would introduce myself horribly and no one cared about me. Fine. Then I was with a friend of mine, Joe Morin, Lisa, who knows him. And he brings me over to his friend. He's like, let me introduce you to Krista. She's a former executive at Procter & Gamble and a leading expert in social media. She's even worked with, and he lists 3 companies. And suddenly, like, all these people are like, ooh, they're like, tell me more, tell me more. And I thought, I can't like bring this guy everywhere with me to make me look good. How do I do this myself? And that's what we need to think about, is how do we, in an appropriate way, highlight our accomplishments so that people take us seriously. So what you essentially want to do is, I've listed all these differences of creating a powerful brand. Some of these you may be ready to go, like visual consistency, I do pretty well. Other things maybe are not your strength right now. That's okay. Choose 2 or 3 of these to really amplify and nail with your personal brands, and that will help to strengthen it even further. So the third step is delivering a personal brand. Here, what we want to do is amplify our message. How do we get in front of people? And the first thing, again, that I always recommend is audit yourself. When I got started on Instagram, I took a look at my profile a few months in, and I realized 90% of my pictures were of alcohol. And
mine probably too.
Right. And I didn't really think about it, but how is that impacting my brand? Like, I don't actually have a drinking problem, but that would be the only thing I took pictures of. So then I made a point. Here's how I want to be perceived. Here's where I'm at right now. Let me find the right blend of content to bring that to life. And that's what success really was. So what you want to think about is, how are you showing up and how do you want to show up? And then build an online presence that works for you. There's a lot of social networks you can choose to use. What I would suggest is choose one platform and knock it out of the park. As I work in social media, and I actually think social media people do a huge disservice by giving people FOMO, making them feel like they need to be everywhere. And then we do a mediocre job in 10 places. You know what? The Instagram influencer making $1 million, they don't care about their LinkedIn, right? The YouTube star, they don't care about their Facebook page. The LinkedIn rockstar personal brand builder, yeah, their Facebook page is all personal. Leave them alone there, right? So think about the channels that work for you and really master those. LinkedIn is probably going to be the top place that you go to really build and amplify your personal brand. A few quick tips for LinkedIn. 1, your picture matters most. It's the #1 thing people use to judge you. Get a good picture that looks like you, right? If it doesn't look like you, inconsistent. Get a good picture that looks like you, smiling and approachable. Your face should make up 60% of the frame, so that when people see you in their news feed with this tiny little picture, it's popping. Your headline should focus on what you do and why you're awesome at it. So there's a lot of different strategies people use for headlines on LinkedIn, but it should always achieve those 2 things. So as you think about what you want to do with building your presence, we covered a lot of ground, but I wanted to help you to think about all of the different things that you could be doing to really create and amplify yourself. But the first thing I would say is, when it comes to growing your brand and your presence, do a few things consistently well. Maybe you start by focusing on LinkedIn. Secondly, get feedback. I do something, I call it the introduction test, where I introduce myself to someone. So let's say Lisa and I are at a networking event together. I would go and introduce myself to someone new and leave. And then I'd ask Lisa 10 minutes later to go over to that person and say, hey, I saw you talking to Krista. What does she do? And then you see, what do they remember? I also like to see what other people point out. So for example, whenever I speak at an event, I listen to how every other speaker gets introduced, and then I pull things from that. And so when I think of how I write my bio, I learned so much from other people who seemed more accomplished than me, but I didn't think to put that stuff on my bio. And then always be growing, evolving, and looking at other people for opportunities. So with that, definitely feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn if you have any questions, etc. I know we didn't have that much time together today, so I wanted to walk you through the key elements, but certainly you can feel free to connect with me on any social network. I'm myself. And also send me an email if you have anything specific.
Krista, this was amazing. We are really at time, but we'd love to invite you back and maybe share a little bit more, maybe do a workshop for the female disruptors. But thank you. This has been, I learn something new every time I hear you speak. So I'm going to freshen up my LinkedIn a little bit. Thanks to you.
Yeah, thanks so much. And for the attendees, look at the LinkedIn profiles of all the speakers. Some of them have done an amazing job of really honing and empowering their brand. So that's a pro tip. Look at what all these speakers are doing, because I bet you they're all thinking about this stuff.
Awesome. Well, I will see everybody on the next session. It is Katie Wells and Krista. I will either see you on the next session or I'll see you in Boca.
Yes, sounds good. Thanks so much, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.